My agreement mentions to tidy up and leave a seal envelope with a single dime inside. When I squeezed it, it crumbled effortlessly. This is meant to be my employer pension after 30 years of duty. The one ridiculing me is the current president, James Anderson. As the youthful second-generation president, he made me feel desolation and void. I have no attachment to this corporation anymore. They have changed too much. They no longer appreciate their employees. Understood, I acknowledged as I took the envelope and nodded. I proceeded directly to the systems management room and erased the company's management system data. Within minutes, a commotion arises in the office. The president, looking pale, rushes to me in a panic. "Hey Joseph, what did you do?" I brace myself and face him. Thus commenced my prolonged battle with the second-generation president who wrecked the corporation. My name is Joseph Taylor. I'm 49 years old and have toiled at the same corporation for numerous years. I joined right after high school and I'm the eldest employee here. In an era when job hopping is common, I might be deemed a rarity. I'm in charge of system management and hold a responsible position as a manager. It's challenging, but I cherish this fulfilling job. Recently, my workload has diminished as my juniors have grown more capable. Life has been smooth sailing. "Excuse me, Mr. Taylor, an error has occurred but I can't discern the cause," says my exceptional junior, Chris Johnson. When he queried me, I scrutinized the screen. "This code here is erroneous. It should be like this." "Oh, I understand. As anticipated of you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you so much," Chris says with a bright smile. "Soon I'll be relinquishing system management to you. I'm relying on you." "Oh no, I'm not there yet. What are you talking about? I'll be 50 soon. What will you do when I retire?" "You still have more than 10 years. You're getting ahead of yourself, Mr. Taylor," he says, not yet realizing how swiftly time flies being in his 30s. "But I plan to work hard until my retirement." This is meant to be my employer pension after 30 years of duty, I ponder. The world of systems is progressing rapidly. If I don't keep studying, I'll quickly fall behind. I was content and felt fulfilled working in such a job. Yes, until that incident occurred. It struck abruptly. The president, Robert Anderson, fell ill and had to be hospitalized. There was no prospect of his recovery, so his only son, James, hastily became the second-generation president. James's words during his inaugural address were fervent. "This sudden event has left us all perplexed, but now is the time to unify and grow. Let's change, commencing here and now." To the disheartened employees, his spirited speech felt like a breath of fresh air. James had the charisma that made everyone believe he could effect positive change. I was moved by his speech, and given his experience working in the subsidiary, I expected him to carry on his father's legacy admirably. However, this hope soon shattered. He began his tenure with a focus on cost-cutting and efficiency, starting with staff reductions, sudden organizational reforms, and personnel transfers. The office quickly descended into chaos. The worst treatment was reserved for older, long-serving employees. The president claimed they were hindering the growth of younger staff and started demoting them effectively, reducing their salaries. Talented salespeople were moved to back-office roles, while support staff were pushed into frontline positions where they struggled, encouraging them to resign. Conversely, young employees were given favorable treatment and promoted, regardless of their actual skills. I might have understood if the evaluations had reflected their abilities, but talented young workers lost trust in the company and left. Eventually, only the president's young favorites, who benefited from undeserved perks, remained. Today, another of my trusted colleagues is leaving the company. He was an outstanding salesperson who boosted our revenue. "Thank you for everything, Joseph." "Yeah, but why do you have to leave?" "Who knows, but I'm tired of trying so hard here," he sighed. "Joseph, you're the only one who can manage the systems in this company. You'll be fine. Hang in there." Seeing him force a smile, I felt tears well up and looked down. At least for the last time, I should see him off with a smile. Watching the back of a departing comrade, how many times have I felt this frustration? You'd think this would lead to a strike, but it never happened. Talented people just quietly left, and those remaining were either the hardworking, the resigned, or those who supported President James. I was one of the hardworking ones. I still wanted to cling to this company, to which I owed so much. As for the company's performance, it was visibly declining. It was to be expected, but President James seemed a bit troubled. It's probably just the reaction to the recent organizational reforms, but we'll recover from here. It's like crouching before a jump. I was disgusted when I saw him saying this to his followers. As long as there are people praising him with "as expected of the president," your words are different. He will never realize his mistakes, I sighed. I returned to the system management room where Chris was waiting for me and immediately spoke. Big news, Mr. Taylor. The president is coming to inspect the system management room today. Rumor has it that after personnel changes, he's now targeting the company's fixed costs and considering cost-cutting measures for the system. What should we do, Mr. Taylor? Well, there's not much we can do. President James seems to like making cuts to the core parts of the company. It's good that he's enthusiastic about his new role, but his focus is off. After a while, President James arrived at the system management room where we were. He glanced around the room with a puzzled look, as if trying to figure something out. Isn't the air conditioning too high? Heating and cooling costs are significant, you know. Computers are sensitive to heat, so it's for management purposes, I explained. I see, President James said, ignoring the basic questions. I immersed myself in my work. For some reason, President James only asked questions and talked to Chris. He should know I'm the manager, but he barely acknowledged me. After looking around for a while, he finally spoke to me. Joseph, right? Yes, I replied, surprised. I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. How long have you been working here? 30 years? 30 years, that's a long time. His overly casual tone made me a bit annoyed. Sure, I'm his subordinate, but as someone older, this feels too informal. I saw your base salary, and it's quite high. Was it set that way when you were hired? Yes, it was, but now Chris Heater is also managing the system, right? Well, yes, I had a bad feeling about this, but this was my first one-on-one conversation with President James. I saw this as a good opportunity and decided to boldly advise the president. Mr. President, regarding the system, I don't recommend changing from the current one. President James's eyebrows twitched, but I continued. Right now, with all the recent personnel changes, many employees are not yet familiar with their new roles. Changing the system on top of that will only further reduce efficiency. That's for me to decide, interrupted President James. I closed my mouth, clearly displeased with my input. He glared at me with a harsh expression I hadn't seen before. An employee like you daring to question the president's decisions. Know your place, he said sharply. I'm sorry, Joseph. You're the manager, right? I'll think carefully about your advice, he added sarcastically. He left with a sarcastic remark. Chris, who had been nervously watching our exchange, sighed with relief. I broke out in a cold sweat, Mr. Taylor. You're amazing. I'm sorry for creating an awkward atmosphere, Chris. No, I don't mind. I think your opinion is perfectly reasonable, but the president, he was really unpleasant. What is he thinking? Probably nothing good. I furrowed my brow and thought for a while. Then Chris and I decided to discuss our future plans. 1 month later, I was called to the president's office where President James delivered some shocking news. What did you say? I asked. Thank you for your hard work. You can take it easy now, President James actually said, but what he meant was that I was being dismissed. He smiled as he handed me a thin envelope, saying it was for company reasons, not personal ones. This is your employer pension, I asked, receiving a cheap-looking envelope instead of a bank transfer. It gave me a bad feeling. Still processing the information, I took the envelope and peeked inside, noticing it wasn't even sealed. Inside was a single dime, a copper coin. Mr. President, this isn't funny, even as a joke. Of course not. It's not a joke, President James replied seriously. President James placed the document he had been holding onto his desk and motioned for me to look at it. I recognized it immediately. It was the employment contract I had signed 30 years ago when I joined the company. President James tapped a specific section with his finger. See here, it says your employer pension is 10 cents, he said triumphantly. My eyes widened in disbelief. Next to the section about employer pension, which stated employer pension provided, someone had handwritten 10 cents clearly in ballpoint pen. President James traced over it triumphantly. I didn't write this. It was already there. It's an amusing note, isn't it? But you, without a doubt, signed and stamped this contract, didn't you? President James said. I opened my mouth to protest, but President James cut me off. It's according to the contract. Clean up and leave. His expression told me that arguing was futile. I was probably marked for some time. I represented the kind of long-serving employee President James wanted to push out. The reason I hadn't been targeted yet was because I managed most of the company's systems. However, after his last inspection of the system management room, he must have decided that Chris was capable enough. It's also easy to guess that my advice back then hit a nerve. What a childish and narrow-minded president. A company with a president like this has no future, I thought to myself, recalling the faces of my colleagues who were forced to leave before me. Understood, I smiled and left the president's office. I stuffed the thin envelope into my pants pocket and headed straight to the system management room. There I spoke to Chris, who was waiting. Chris, it's time to execute the plan. So it came to this. All right, I'm ready, Chris nodded. Chris and I sat down at our computers and deleted all the company's management systems. It's hard to build a system, but it can be destroyed in no time. After a while, I gently opened the door to the management room and heard panicked voices from various parts of the office. Hey, I can't send emails or log into the internal system. What's going on? Employees were flustered and unable to do anything. President James, pale and frantic, rushed over to me. Joseph, what did you do? In his panic, he addressed me informally. I faced him calmly and said, I just cleaned up as you asked. I meant your personal belongings. What were you thinking deleting the system? I deleted the system because it was mine. I was just cleaning up what I had lent to the company. I showed him the notice of working conditions. He must not have known about this clause, having only looked at the employment contract. The document clearly stated that the system was on loan for me, that the loan was included in my salary, and that the system would be returned upon my resignation. What is this document? President James asked. It's the notice I received from the company 30 years ago. I'm sure you have a copy on file as well. It's absurd that the entire system becomes unusable because one employee leaves. I wanted to say that what's absurd is offering a single dime as an employer pension, but I held back. If you cancel my dismissal, I'll return both the system and this dime. I handed him the envelope, but President James slapped my hand away. Chris, restore the system immediately, President James shouted. But it will take time, Chris replied. I don't care. Do it as quickly as possible, President James ordered. Yes, Chris said. Following orders, he began working on restoring the system. I exchanged a glance with him and then left the system management room where I had worked for so many years. Quietly, I nurtured a burning resolve against President James. A few days later, while I was relaxing at home, my phone rang. When I looked at the screen, it was the main number from my former company. I answered and heard President James's defeated voice. Joseph, we're in trouble. Chris is struggling to restore the system, and no work is getting done. These past few days, including the weekend, were tough, President James said. President James must have assumed the system would be fixed by now, but it wasn't. The system was still down on the first day back to work. Despite having addressed me informally before, he now humbly sought my help, which almost made me laugh. So, what do you expect me, an outsider, to do? Let us buy the system from you, President James suggested. I listened quietly, thinking about what he said. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. After all the years of dedicated work, and after all the changes he'd made to push out older employees like me, here he was asking for my help. I'll think about it, I finally replied, but I have some conditions. President James sounded relieved. Sure, anything, just name your conditions. First, you'll bring back all the employees you demoted or treated unfairly, including the ones who left. Second, you'll apologize publicly for your unfair treatment of loyal, long-serving employees. And third, you'll change the company's rules to ensure everyone is treated fairly, no matter how old they are or how long they've been here. President James didn't say anything for a moment, but then he agreed. Okay, I'll do it. Just please help us fix the system. I could hear how worried he was in his voice. It was different from the way he usually talked. Okay, I'll come back to the office and see how far Chris has got. But remember, this isn't just about fixing the system. It's about making sure everyone trusts each other and shows each other respect. President James agreed again, and he sounded like he really meant it. I get it. Thank you, Joseph. I put the phone down and sighed. I didn't think things would turn out this way, but maybe there was a chance to make things better, to change the company for the better. I went back to the office and found Chris still working hard, trying to fix the system. He looked tired but hopeful. Chris, how's it going? I asked. It's slow, but I think I'm getting there, he said, looking up at me. Good, keep at it, and let's hope President James keeps his word about the changes, I said, trying to sound hopeful. Chris nodded. I hope so too. It's been tough these past few days. I nodded too. Let's get it done, and Chris, thank you for sticking by me through all of this. Chris smiled. No problem, Mr. Taylor. I'm glad to help. As we worked together to fix the system, I couldn't help but think about the future. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for the company after all. I'll pay $200,000. I couldn't help but laugh at the offer. President James really didn't understand the market value. Are you joking, President? That amount is peanuts for buying that system. Peanuts. Then how much do you want? $1 million. $1 million. His voice cracked, and I was more amused than anything. Even $1 million is a bargain for that system. What are you talking about? That's more than the employer pension. Well, it was just 10 cents. That's not what I meant. Realizing it was time to stop messing with him, I straightened up and addressed President James seriously. President, I'm serious. If you don't buy it for $1 million, you won't get the system, and I won't help Chris either. This is a disaster. Our work is already behind, and if this goes on any longer— A long silence followed. I waited anxiously for his response, but then he said, "Enough. I won't ask for your help. How dare you demand such an outrageous amount, you ungrateful person." He rejected my final offer and hung up. I felt a wave of disappointment. Despite the opportunity, it was clear that he couldn't be trusted with the company. I picked up my phone again. It was time to execute the next phase of the plan. The next day, a loud noise erupted in the president's office. The loud noise came from James, the now former president, pounding his fist on the desk. Why am I being fired? Facing him was his father, Robert Anderson. Though not fully recovered, Robert's presence at the desk was still impressive, and I was moved by it. I'm not firing you. I'm demoting you to an employee so you can learn from the ground up. Me, a former president, working as a regular employee? How humiliating. How humiliating is the chaos you caused within the company, bringing it to the brink? This time, Robert slammed his hand on the desk. James, who had been leaning forward, quickly straightened up. Robert reprimanded him with a voice full of authority. I was a fool to trust your reports. I warned you not to meddle with personnel, yet you forced out so many trusted people, including Joseph here. James glared at me. Indeed, I had devised and executed several plans to address the situation. James's reckless actions had been unbearable. Feeling guilty for bothering the former President Robert during his hospitalization, I had reported the current state of affairs to him. Robert had trusted James's reports without question and felt at ease. However, when he saw my report, he was shocked and realized the gravity of the situation, deciding to return to the company. It pained me to see him push himself when he was still in need of treatment, but when he said, "I'm glad you reported this, Joseph. My foolish son would have destroyed the company I built," I knew I had done the right thing. Chris and I then devised a plan to change the current situation. We knew that if things continued, I would likely be forced out too, so we decided to make the management system unusable to put pressure on James and other unresponsive employees. This was the only form of resistance we could mount as the systems department. As expected, once the system went down, chaos ensued. James couldn't handle the situation, and even his supporters began to lose faith. The hardworking employees finally spoke up, demanding to bring back President Robert. For the first time, James faced protests from the employees and was brought before the board. They criticized him for forcing out many talented employees. While it was good to bring in younger staff, the treatment of those who had contributed for so long was appalling. The poor handling of the system trouble within the company was also discussed. The topic of buying my system was brought up. If we can use that system permanently for $1 million, it's a bargain. Why didn't the president buy it? It would take an enormous amount of time and money to rebuild it from scratch. Hearing the employees' trust and affection for the current system warmed my heart. I felt proud that all my hard work in developing the system had paid off. After the board meeting, James was demoted in the president's office. He finally accepted Robert's words with his head down. Prompted, he reluctantly apologized to me. "I'm sorry, Joseph," he muttered. Though he still seemed dissatisfied, I simply replied, "Yeah." Robert, having witnessed our exchange, spoke to me. "I'm sorry for all the trouble. Will you really come back to this company?" Seeing his anxious expression, I smiled. "Yes, as long as you stand as the president." "Of course. Thank you. Should we go ahead and pay the $1 million for the system, as you suggested?" "That's not necessary. I've already received so much from you," I said. Robert and I laughed together. James watched us with a puzzled look on his face. "I'm glad everything worked out, Mr. Taylor," I said. I was really nervous about how it would turn out. "You went through it a lot, Chris," Robert said to him. "You were stuck working through the weekend. I'm sorry about that." "If it means making the company a better place, I'll give up my weekends anytime," Chris replied. "Besides, all I did was pretend I couldn't fix the system." I was back in the system management room with Chris, the key player in this operation. As a technician who had worked under me for so long, he could have easily fixed the system quickly. His outstanding acting was crucial to resolving this situation. Reflecting on the recent events, Chris remarked with deep emotion, "But James was terrible, wasn't he? offering you a 10-cent employer pension and even faking documents. When he said that, I couldn't help but mutter, actually, there's something you should know. With Chris's curiosity piqued, I decided to share an old story with him, one I had never told anyone before. It was about my younger self and the young president back in the day. I was a recluse during middle and high school. I couldn't fit in at school and had trouble communicating. I shut myself in my room and immersed myself in system development, tinkering with my beloved computer. I created original source codes and built my own systems. Robert, my father's friend, heard about my work. He recognized my abilities and offered me a job as a system manager at his company. For someone like me who had been isolated in my room for years, having someone value my creations meant the world. Moreover, he offered me a salary well above average for a high school graduate. Even though I was out of touch with the world, I knew that the amount he was offering was unusually high. I told him I couldn't accept that much, but Robert shook his head. This is so cheap. Our company is just starting and this is all we can afford now, but we will increase it with raises. This system is that valuable. But I can't. I hesitated. In a moment of childish impulsiveness, I grabbed the employment contract and scribbled on it with a ballpoint pen. Next to the phrase employer pension provided, I wrote 10 cents. Robert's eyes widened. 10 cents? 10 cents is fine. I'm getting paid so much each month that it feels wrong to take more when I leave. Then, let's consider this system a loan to the company. I'll put that in the terms of your employment and I'll give you a document to that effect later. And when you leave, you can take the system back, but we'll buy it from you immediately. Then, that would be the employer pension, wouldn't it? Oh, you caught that. You really are smart. His hearty laugh was a relief to me, and started working there. It was then that I decided to follow him for the rest of my life. He was the benefactor who brought me back into the sunlight. After I finished telling this story, Chris took a deep breath. So that's what happened with you and the president. Yeah, but I never expected that contract to resurface because of James. Speaking of James, he left the company shortly after that as a former president, he couldn't bear to work as a regular employee. He started his own company with a friend, but Robert mentioned that they were struggling financially and that their prospects didn't look good. Even after fully recovering and returning, Robert faced many challenges. I hoped James wouldn't cause his father any more trouble. I have to follow the example of the lion and throw him into the valley, Robert muttered sternly. Seeing his determined look, I felt that even if James ever asked for help, he wouldn't get it. After all, he had chosen to leave the company first. With the former president back, the company was starting to regain its former energy. Chris and I worked hard to develop a more user-friendly system to make up for the lost time. One day, I was called to the president's office and received surprising news. What? You want me to become an executive? Yes, after everything that happened, I realize you are my right-hand man. I want you to eventually become an executive vice president. I hope you'll work by my side from now on. Executive vice president. I felt a surge of responsibility and my body tensed up. Becoming an executive means being involved in the entire company's management. As an executive vice president, I'd be the president's right-hand man. Is it really okay for someone like me to take on such a role? Robert seemed to sense my anxiety. With the same gentle eyes as always, he spoke to me. The next generation is ready, isn't it? Yes, I'm sure Chris can handle it. Then, there's no problem. Let's start preparing for the shareholders' meeting. We'll also need to get the executive appointment contract ready. At the mention of that word, Robert and I exchanged glances and chuckled. Make sure you don't write 10 cents on this one. Oh, come on. I won't. We laughed together, filling the room with warmth. As an executive, could I bring back the colleagues who left with sad faces? With that thought, I left the president's office feeling hopeful. I was truly glad I stood up for this company back then. This company is the place that helped me escape my reclusive life and made me smile under the blue sky again. The contract is just a piece of paper, but through that single piece of paper, people are connected. Not just people, but also through time to my future self, feeling a new breeze within me. I